So when President Trump introduced tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, and then suspended Mexico and Canada tariffs, some of them, there was a 2-day period between a Tuesday and a Thursday. In those 2 days, corn futures dropped 8.6%, soybean futures dropped 5%, literally in 2 days.
That's Illinois Department of Agriculture Director Jerry Costello earlier this week testifying in front of a House Ag Committee here in Springfield about the impacts of tariffs on the farming community. There was other testimony about cuts and freezes of federal spending and so on. Of course, it hasn't even been a full 2 months or so of President Donald Trump being in office, and how things have been shaken up. To join us to talk more about this here with Illinois in Focus Daily, let's talk with Casey Harper. He is the bureau chief over in Washington, D.C., joining us live here. Casey, good morning. You've been obviously watching closely what's happening with the new Trump administration. When we talk about tariffs, we're hearing the Democrats' line of attack being this is a tax increase on consumers, on businesses in the United States. It's just going to increase taxes. What's really behind the Trump tariffs, and what has the president been saying the past few weeks as to the impacts on the economy, the stock market, and prices and such?
Yeah, well, thanks, Greg. It's a complicated issue. I think it's good we're taking some time to look into it because there's a few different motives and there are a few different impacts. I mean, when you talk about what's behind it, was your question, what's behind Trump doing this? I mean, we can talk about the impact on consumers, and I think we should, and we can talk about the dollars and cents. But I think the greater motive behind it for President Trump is resetting really the global economic order. I think President Trump has been really clear, even since 2016, that he feels that the rest of the world takes advantage of the United States. And that's really a theme of his criticism of other nations and even our allies. He thinks that, the U.S. has, when you think about the maritime global order, that the U.S. is getting a raw deal, that we pay for the defense of nations all around the world. We have this nuclear umbrella that extends, to different parts of the world. We pay defense budgets. For example, Trump is supposed to meet with the NATO general today, and he has famously complained for a long time that the U.S. pays for NATO's defense, and the NATO member countries in Europe, they don't pay what they agreed to pay. And what they pay is really very, very small for military defense compared to what the U.S. pays. And so that may seem unrelated to tariffs, but I think in Trump's mind, it's really not, because it hits that general theme that America should be put first, that we're being ripped off by the rest of the world. And so then that comes to the practical policy. Now, a tariff is really, a tax on an import, right? A tax on things that are made overseas and sold here. He started off by going after China. I think this is widely a popular move. He did a 10% tariff on Chinese goods and then a 20%. He's upped it now. And I think that's broadly popular. You don't hear him get a lot of criticism for that. It's true that China has taken advantage of the U.S. for a while. They do different things like manipulate their currency. They've also been taking advantage of tax loopholes for a while, something he closed, is not reported on much except at thecentersquare.com and a few other places. But there's something called the de minimis exception that allowed these Chinese companies to ship, billions of dollars of consumer goods to the U.S. and not pay taxes on it, while American companies were paying taxes. And so he closed that loophole. He's put the tariffs on China. But what's got most of the news, Greg, as I'm sure you want to talk about, is what's going on with the EU, what's going on with Canada, what's going on with Mexico, and how it'll impact U.S. consumers. And I think that depending on how it shakes out, it could make things more expensive for Americans, but there's a lot of unknowns right now.
The president, when he had that joint session in front of Congress with the, it wasn't a State of the Union speech, it was just a speech in front of a joint session. But regardless, he talked about how, there might be some pain here. And he even reflected back to his first term when he was getting that deal with China put together before COVID hit. And farmers were a little up in arms at first, but Trump said, hold on, bear with me, we'll get through this hump. And then, they did see some returns, however, then COVID hit. But talk about what the president's acknowledged here, right? I mean, there is going to be an economic, I don't know if you call it a speed bump or an economic blip or a term. He doesn't want to use the word recession, but are we going to experience that for the potential of long-term gains down the line?
Yeah, you're right. It was a very interesting admission from President Trump that there would be pain. The president almost never admits something like that. He's usually very optimistic. It's all about winning. He's winning. We're winning. America's winning. And that's his message. But for him to acknowledge there's going to be some pain, it caught my attention as well, Greg. And I think that we should take him seriously when he gives that warning because it's probably true. Now, there's a few things going on here. I mean, one is there's a lot of Republicans who have not really spoken out against these tariffs yet because they say they're just negotiating tactics and that Trump actually isn't going to implement all these tariffs long term. He's just using them to get concessions from different countries. And if that's true, then I think the tariffs will be really beneficial to a lot of Americans. It maybe get some good policies from other countries. We've seen pledges, for instance, from Canada and Mexico, at least initially, to up the border security and help take on the fentanyl issue, which is a very big problem in the U.S. So, as a negotiating tool, that I think the tariffs have a lot of potential, and Trump has been able to get some success there. Now, when it seems that the problem has grown though, because we're seeing an escalating trade war. Just today, or just recently, I believe it was today, Trump threatened a 200% tariff on alcohol imported from the EU because they put a 50% tariff on American whiskey. Canada also put a tariff on whiskey, and Ontario threatened they were going to charge the U.S. more for electricity, but then they reneged on it. There's a lot of chaos here, Greg, and I think Trump does well in chaos. He thrives in these negotiating, chaotic environments. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the end he comes out with a decent deal for Americans, but there's going to be a lot of chaos along the way. We're seeing that reflected in the stock market, which doesn't like the chaos. It's been struggling lately. Generally, in principle, though, with all that being said, the deals may end up good. Yes, tariffs will raise prices on Americans. Now, there are some benefits potentially to tariffs, such as encouraging manufacturing and domestic production. And I think we've already seen some domestic, Apple did a major investment in the US. We've seen other companies announce investments in the US. So but those are long-term benefits, and tariff price changes are going to be felt very quickly, whereas the benefits of tariffs of any domestic manufacturing Trump is able to conjure up, it may take us a while to see those benefits.
From the Washington D.C. Bureau for the Center Square, we're talking with Casey Harper here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Tariffs obviously going to be continued debate. We're hearing it on the Illinois House floor. Almost every day they're in session, Democrats getting up, talking about the policy they say is bad. Republicans kind of pushing back and saying that that's what Trump got elected to do, is to stand up for America and such. So we're really seeing the national political debate, fine-tuned down into states like Illinois. Something else that has been on the lips of Illinois Democrats is Elon Musk. His name was brought up multiple times yesterday on the House floor, just in passing on points of personal privilege, and all throughout the halls of the State House. People are calling him, the president and the co-president, and saying that he's the one that's really running the show here. But there seems to just be a level of disdain for the DOGE efforts, the Department of Government Efficiency efforts that Musk is moving forward with. How is this playing out? How close, and how transparent are their efforts and what they're finding? And is this going to result in some net positives for taxpayers?
Yeah, well, we could talk about why Democrats hate Elon Musk. I think there's a few reasons for that. But speaking on DOGE specifically, DOGE has had some big wins. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's been a little bit of a bumpy road. That, for instance, they sent out that email saying you need to send us 5 things you did last week. And that created a lot of controversy, even some of Trump's own cabinet members saying, don't answer that email. And I think this is a great case of example of how the Trump administration wins these news cycles, even if it is kind of chaotic and a little unorthodox and unprofessional, because in some sense they looked bad by sending out having that confusion. But ultimately, the chaos got all the attention on Trump and these cuts. It's all we've been talking about. It's all the media has been writing about is these DOGE cuts. So that's one. He got the attention, and that's everything in today's media economy. And then, another thing to think about here is, what did Americans take away from that? Wait a minute. These federal employees are actually upset that they have to send one email, 5 things they did last week. I mean, if you're a teacher working 50 hours a week, or a construction guy in the heat all day, it's like, I could think of 5 things I did last week. You can't do that sitting in the kind of picture, the image that's been created, somebody sitting in their bathrobe working from home on some government contract, doing nothing. So I think they're winning some of these optics. And then the examples, I mean, you mentioned Trump's joint address. He was able to throw out a lot of examples that just were indefensible. I mean, talking about transgender operas and funding, propaganda overseas. I mean, there's just so many of these examples that are winning with Americans. I mean, Americans polling shows Americans believe there is waste in the federal government. They really want to cut it. Democrats are not going to be able to convince Americans there's no waste in the government. I don't think they are, but I think they're maybe making a political mistake here by being so anti Musk and DOGE. I think they might be smarter to, highlight the things they like that are being cut and then be the voice of reason in the room. I think that's actually where Democrats could succeed, is if they said, hey, we agree with your heart here, but we want to be the voice of reason because Trump is often seen as unreasonable. But they're not doing that. They are being kind of unreasonable when they showed that at the joint address where they kind of stood up, they made a lot of antics. And even with a kind of chaotic, one-of-a-kind president like Trump, Democrats right now seem like the more unreasonable, the more emotional party who's disunified and not quite sure. As much as they dislike Trump and Musk, they're not quite sure how to stop them.
But there are some implications that are being felt on the ground. I do want to play another clip of the Illinois Department of Agriculture director. And Casey, you may not hear this down the line. I'll reiterate it for you. But he's talking about a program that gets federal funds, and those program dollars have been frozen as of right now.
The Trump administration has unilaterally cut or withheld funds that Congress has contractually authorized. Here's an example of some of those programs. LFPA, Local Food Purchase Assistance, $43.5 million in that program. About $18 million is still owed to the state of Illinois.
So Costello saying $18 million of the local food purchase program funded by federal tax dollars has not been given to Illinois. And then you have even the Illinois Department of Natural Resources talking about, certain dollars that go to rural volunteer fire departments that they're not able to get from the federal government, at least at this time. Casey, there's a lot of legal fighting and wrangling about these dollars. Of course, all of this coming as you've got a potential vote on some kind of stopgap spending bill and the politics of that. Is this going to be resolved? Are we going to see, some light at the end of the tunnel in the next few months?
Well, I mean, for Trump and the Republicans' sake, they should hope they get it resolved. I think right now, Trump is in his honeymoon phase. He's in his first 100 days. He has demonstrated through all these examples of wasteful spending that there needs to be major cuts. We have a $36 trillion deficit. The Congressional Budget Office just came out and said we're on track to have a $2 trillion deficit this fiscal year. And so it's not hard to convince Americans that the federal government is in crisis, spending's out of control, and there's a lot of waste. And so I think, it's not good to have for Republicans to have these real impacts. Like the food bank, example you just played, and there are many others around the country. But right now, I think they're in a grace period, and as long as they figure some of these things out in the next few months, I think Americans are going to have enough patience with this. Now, if a year, 2 years go by, and we're still in this period of chaos, I think some fatigue is going to set in. Republicans are going to feel it in the polls and in the polling. But right now, they're in this grace period. First 100 days, I think it will even go beyond that. The honeymoon phase is protecting Trump from a lot of these things. And you could say, what do you expect? We're cutting billions of dollars in federal government. There's going to be some hiccups along the way. As long as they kind of resolve some of this stuff and make it a little more organized in the next few months, I don't think it's going to be fatal to them to have these real world impacts. And some of it will be restored. And Trump has shown a willingness when there's real pain points to address them, the way he did with American motor companies and his tariffs. So if there is a real outcry, he's willing to change policies. And that's been to his benefit so far.
Well, I've kept Casey long enough here, but one final thing I want to discuss is the border situation. Obviously, that was something that Trump hit hard as he was running for president. Illinois impacted by that with the 50+ thousand non-citizen migrants that ended up in Chicago with the billions of dollars that's been spent. The taxpayer subsidies for non-citizen health care in the state of Illinois is billions of dollars and projected to be more. There are efforts to make the state of Illinois an even stronger sanctuary state. How is Trump going to, essentially deal with these types of states that have these sanctuary jurisdictions?
it's an interesting question. Trump has shown a willingness so far to defund states that don't come into line with his agenda. He just defunded Maine in many respects for their unwillingness to ban transgender athletes from competing in girls' sports. And that's a very popular issue, by the way. Republicans poll very well on that. They have wide support among Americans. And on the border issue, actually, Trump has wide support as well. It's one of the main reasons he won. His best line of the joint address was when he said, Democrats said we needed a new legislation to fix the border. Turns out all we needed was a new president. And he got major applause for that. It was probably his best line of the night because it's his biggest win. He has almost entirely shut down the border. He's initiated one of the biggest deportation efforts we've seen in a long time. And there's really no major uproar, or there's no daily news cycles of sad grandmothers being pulled away from their children, like things that, could be fodder for Democrats to attack the president. It just hasn't materialized, I think, because they've been wrongly obsessed with Elon Musk and DOGE. It's almost given cover to Trump's deportation effort. But when it comes to these states, he's got a battle on his hands. States like Illinois, California, they're spending a lot of money on these illegal immigrants. But I think that issue is not as popular for Democrats as it once was. And then we saw for instance, black voters really complaining about this issue, that illegal immigrants are getting more government aid than they are. We saw that was viral in the last presidential campaign. Legally, I think that there is a battle to be fought against these sanctuary cities. Trump has the power, especially with Congress behind him, to revoke some federal funding to some of these cities. And it just remains a question of how far he wants to go and how much these Democratic mayors and leaders in places like Chicago and Illinois are willing to die on this hill, because they might have to.
Casey Harper, he is the reporter for the Center Square out of Washington, D.C. Greatly appreciate your time. We'll connect again in the near future and stay updated with how Washington, D.C. is impacting states like Illinois and beyond. So greatly appreciate you, and we'll talk again in the near future, all right?
Thanks.
It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning here for Illinois in Focus Daily.